Before I begin this video, I want to put this disclaimer out there. I'm going to be talking about my personal experiences with suicide and suicidal thoughts. Please know that there are people out there who do care about you and value you, even if you don't know it or don't outwardly show it. Things get hard, and in this day and age, it can be hard knowing when there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Please, if you have ever considered anything I'm going to be addressing, please reach out to someone you know and someone you trust for help. Even if it feels silly or unnecessary, just do it. There's even the suicide prevention line. I've had good experiences with them, and I've had awful experiences with them. Regardless, those experiences kept me alive and kept me talking. I'll say this one last time. Please reach out to someone if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health turmoil and suicidal thoughts. Keeping yourself and those you love alive for this lifetime is the most important thing. Hell, I love you. There's always going to be someone there for you, and I believe in you. Hello, this is Oka, and this is what I've been working on. I wanted to start working on becoming a better illustrator and experimenting with different mediums I am unfamiliar with. Recently, I've been going into using alcohol markers and decided to use that as my medium for this project. I wanted to tackle a darker, more vulnerable topic for me than anything else at the moment. I spent most of my undergrad working with horror pieces and creating things that looked disturbing and unnerving to the general public. I feel like I got some results from that, and some people really liked the drawings that I did with charcoal and graphite. My photography would focus more on me and my life and my personal surroundings, but never got too dark. I felt that this would be a good time to finally explore those darker subjects that have been swirling in my head. I decided to settle on an image of myself with a gun in my hand and a gunshot wound in my head. I know, it's really fucked up and dark, but it satisfied something within me. I'm proud to say that I haven't had thoughts like this in a long time, and they don't happen that much anymore. They flare up occasionally, sure, but they aren't as overbearing and overwhelming as they used to be in my early adulthood. They do make their way back into my head from time to time, though, and, it's something I've been meaning to address. Anytime those thoughts would flare up, I would always say to myself, what if I just did it? What if I could? I just want to paint the ceiling with my fucking brains. Sometimes I just want to put a bullet in my head. Things like that. Thankfully, through years of therapy and support, I never act on those impulses anymore. I can't lie, though. I'm morbidly curious. I do want to see what I would look like from the outside, just dead, lying there, moments after my passing, the husk of my body occupying the space I once called home. It's not a future I desire anymore, but it still occupies my headspace. Putting a visual representation of that image into the world was my way of satisfying that curiosity and, I guess, sort of getting closure for what that future would look like. Lately, I've been incorporating words into my work. Some stuff I was working on just before this included a small passage acting as a story that tied to the image that I was working on. I enjoyed doing that, but I didn't feel like this needed a long-winded story to go along with it. I felt that all I needed to say was just a couple words, so I went with that. I chose to use a comic book style for the text, putting them in small, isolated boxes within the image. I have a hard time drawing anatomy, and I knew I was going to need a reference image to capture the look I wanted. I decided on something that would have a little more forced perspective than something straight on. I wanted the camera low and near the barrel of the gun and my hand. I wanted it looking upwards at me in my head. I was considering having my head cut off in the frame to make it feel more ambiguous, but I eventually felt that putting my face in it was important to appease that morbid curiosity. That was always the image I had imagined when I thought about composing a piece for this, and felt that removing it now would be pointless. To start drawing, I laid out an 11 by 14 piece of marker paper and taped it down. As I was taping it, I thought it'd be interesting to make it narrower than if I were to place the tape borders equally. I thought that the narrower look would help force the perspective even more, and I decided to try it out. Using the reference photos I took, I was able to start placing my vanishing points where I wanted them. I then ditched the reference photos I spent the last 30 minutes taking and improvised my body's proportions, position, and perspective. I used the vanishing points I placed to help determine the position of my spine, my shoulders, and my legs, allowing me to fill in the rest for myself. I wanted my appearance to be accurate to how I am at the time of this piece. In a super morbid and dark way, this is my first self-portrait that I have ever drawn. I've painted my head, arm, and torso dissected once, but never a self-drawing. I even drew simplified versions of the tattoos I have on that arm, and gave myself the same glasses and facial hair. I know that in a year I probably won't look too different, but not too similar either. In 10 years, maybe completely changed. Who knows? I think this would be good to look back on as I continue to change and continue to grow as a person. I'll be bald no matter what, so thankfully I won't ever need to draw any luscious locks. I don't own a gun, or at least a real one, so I used a Nerf pistol I have to kill spiders and bugs to compose my hand and finger positions. I wanted the real gun to look like a revolver, but figured this would be good enough to work with. I was going to find either a 3D model of a revolver or create it myself for the final drawing. As I was messing with the sketches, however, I couldn't get a hand position that looked natural. They would be pointing the wrong direction, or the fingers would be in the wrong places, and it would make the gun feel staged. While we're talking about it again, the gun was all wrong. I did a sketch of a revolver as a silhouette and thought, yeah, that looks fine, and rolled with it. Turns out once you start drawing in a 3D space with vanishing points and an already goofy hand while trying to imagine how a revolver would look at this angle, you get pretty shitty results. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I remembered I have the Big Zuck's Totally Not a Failure metaverse at my fingertips. In other words, I have a VR headset for games. I went into a 3D sculpting game first to try to create a model of a revolver that I could then spin and scale to the right vantage I want, screenshot it, then use it as a reference. I was having trouble with the controls, however, as well as not liking my renditions of the pistol. Then, like the idiot I am, I remembered that I have a military sim first-person shooter on the Quest as well. That also, coincidentally, recently added a revolver to the game's arsenal, and decided to boot that up instead. There, I was easily able to get a well-modeled revolver and position it within space the way I wanted. I took my reference screenshots and went back to drawing. Turns out my audio for this part was horrible. So this is a screenshot from the VR game that I went into to get the model that I wanted for the revolver, as well as be able to mess with the perspective and the angle and the hand, getting something that looked realistic and believable that I just was having a hard time conjuring in my head. After finally getting all of my initial sketches down, I began to outline the piece. I've read different artists will use their alcohol markers first to color everything, then place their outlines on top to prevent the ink from bleeding into the colors. I've also read that some will draw their designs on different paper, then print on the marker paper a scan of the outlines, allowing for bleedless coloring. I opted for neither option because Option A felt like I was going to lose control of my line work and accidentally color something wrong. And option B felt like it had too many steps. I adopted the mentality of do it in ink first and get your outlines and deep shadows. Then color in all the cells you just made. Avoid the lines, but if it bleeds, oh well. I was willing to do the very tedious work of coloring things very carefully to get as close to the border as I possibly could without dragging the ink around. I use India ink pens for the outlines, and I feel like some of them work really well and don't bleed at all, and others will immediately fuck with the colors. I really don't mind the tedious work of carefully following the outlines, however. I feel like I can begin to meditate, process, and digest any thoughts I may be having at the time. I feel like it's helped me work on some of these darker thoughts and address them rather than feeling like I need to shut them out. I wanted my color palette to be accurate to how I actually look and what I would actually wear. I wanted a grayish blue shirt with brown pants and square glasses. I didn't need to worry about anything too dramatic for details because I didn't want them to take away from the piece. If my clothing was too loud, I felt like it would be distracting from anyone viewing the piece. I wanted the most vibrant part of the drawing to be the blood splatter on the wall, making sure to draw everyone's attention to that. I wanted my bed sheets to be accurate to what they currently are at the time of making this image, putting them at a muted green. I know a better, more accurate green exists in Blick's supply, but I can't really afford to go buy more markers at the moment. I got something that was close enough and shaded, sadly, with green, with gray, and shaded, sadly, with gray, but again, close enough. I wasn't sure what to do for my skin either. Again, I wanted it to be like I had just done it a few seconds before this image was taken. I decided to still have some pink in my face, as the blood hadn't settled to the bottom of my body, or wherever it goes when you die sitting down, and added some pinks in my arms as well. With the border being there, I decided it would be interesting to have the blood splatter expand beyond the edges of the image itself. I therefore saved it for last, as I really wanted to make sure I got all of my other values down beforehand. I began by coloring in the entire wall first to ensure I have at least something there. I didn't want to plan out the blood as much as I did for the other parts of the image because I wanted it to be almost natural to the end of the piece. It is the finishing touch, and I want it to be present before I put it in. By that, I have to look at the piece for what it is at the moment. At 95% completion, it looks like I'm sitting on my bed, debating whether or not I should do it, whether or not I should pull the trigger. I could stop drawing here and leave it as that tension, but I don't think that would satisfy the morbid curiosity that I have. That last 5% is when I decide to effectively kill myself by putting blood on my head and on the wall. Being present for it just means I am consciously and willingly putting viscera and gore within the same frame of a self-portrait. It's a weird and difficult hurdle to go over, but I do it anyway. I finish up some of the last details, peel off the tape, and finally look at the completed piece. Now that the piece is completed, I just want to give some closing thoughts on it. Overall, I am happy with the result that I got. I feel like I satisfied that morbid curiosity of knowing what my body would look like after I shot myself. I wish the perspective was a little bit more forced, and I know my proportions for anatomy are quite off, but I feel like the message was conveyed, and to me, that is the most important thing. I went in and added some shadows just behind my figure off camera, but aside from that, I'm happy with the result. Thank you for watching.